Oh boy. Thank you. Thank you. You can take a picture. Yeah. Now, as Dennis said, if it's possible to bring up the lights a little more, it would be absolutely, oh, not on me, yes, on you. Excellent. It would be beautiful to see you because I'm in a studio every day and it's wonderful to communicate with you virtually. But to actually see you there is such a great gift, and it's one of the joys of being out on the road. Wait, did I say joy of a 100-city tour? For that, I blame our tour guide extraordinaire, Dennis Moynihan, who is so much more than that, even if he is geographically challenged. We were in California last week, right? We were doing San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, Stanford, Redway, Willits, passed through Laytonville. And folks there have a low-power FM station. They had begged us to be there, but there was no way we could make it that day from Santa Rosa to Willits to Redway and do an event in Laytonville. So they stood on the road with a big sign. Which is very beautiful. I mean, this trip has been truly amazing. In Redway, and don't be alarmed if I cough, I do cough a little bit, which brings me to Redway, because, you know, that's a place, I mean, Dennis is from Colorado, this is all, you know, run-of-the-mill, pot is legal there. But in California, as you know, it's not exactly, though in Redway, it's hard to believe it's not. It is, I mean, 90% of the economy. I'm not used to this. I'm from New York, so there was a reception, and then afterwards our event. And in the reception, you ask people, you know, what do you do? You know, I'm a businessman in town. Oh, what kind of business? And I mean, it's just obvious. They say, what do you mean, cannabis? Or someone you say, what do you do? And they say, I'm a manicurist. Oh, really? For a local salon? And I trim buds. Oh. But it's completely out in the open. Radio stations are offering canna sleeves, which is, well, maybe some of you know what it is, but it's, you know, when you want to be cutting things on your sleeve or something. I mean, I learned so much on the road. And then when I was on the stage speaking, and then I started to cough, and people graciously, there's the water, people graciously, you know, tossed up Ricolas, right? That's what I usually, my cough suppressant of choice. And so, oh, thank you very much. And I opened up the Ricola, but it did not look like Ricola. That was that part of it. But then, I mean, the journey's been amazing. There's Ithaca College. We started on April 6th. And there, the students, then supported by the staff, in the previous period, the POC at IC, people of color at Ithaca College, had challenged their president, were angry that they didn't feel he dealt with racial incidents in a proper way, were pushing for his resignation, and before you know it, Tom Rochon resigned, the president of Ithaca College. We then moved on to The Ohio State University. They added the recently, in Columbus, Ohio. The next day, St. Louis in the morning, Left Bank Books, wonderful event in the library. I'm a library connoisseur. I grew up in libraries. My dad was on the school board, library board for 25 years. Library was at the end of our street. I lived in a library. It was my living room. It's why for years I talked in a very hushed manner, because I had been scolded by librarians for so many years. And God forbid I should challenge authority. But libraries, so we did an event with Left Bank Books in the library, and Left Bank is a wonderful independent bookstore. And by the way, it's beautiful to see the bookseller out here, because so many thousands of bookstores, independent bookstores, over the 6 books that we've done, have disappeared. And They're wonderful places, libraries, bookstores, and independent media, all of them sanctuaries of dissent that we must protect and preserve and support, places where people go in to expand their minds, challenge their imaginations, and we just feel it's so critical. I didn't really understand the politics of book selling before doing these books, but now I do. And Dennis was talking about if you get these 2 books, you get this DVD. But it is wonderful to support both the bookstores, the stations, because we are all in this together. And it's also nice when it drives it up the New York Times bestseller list, because you know they don't like to talk about Democracy Now! So we've had 6 books on the list. This one we thought would be extremely explicit because you just get 1 line. It's a mathematical equation, so they can't say no to printing it. So it was the exception to rule is static, standing up to the madness. So here we thought would be very explicit, Democracy Now! Now, it's not as if the networks and the Times don't take stories from us, right? I'm convinced that in the future, the word exclusive will be defined by Webster's as heard on Democracy Now! The year before or the month before you heard it on one of these networks. The classic one was on MSNBC. We had this whistleblower on, and the first time, and he trusted Democracy Now!, and that's why he came on. A week later, MSNBC tuned into the top of a show. Billboard is the top thing on the show when we tell you everything that's going to happen on a show, and then we move into headlines. Same with MSNBC. They have this whistleblower speaking, but he's going to speak live, so how did they get him speaking in advance, just a clip in the Billboard? Well, I recognized just the tip of the microphone, you know, the Statue of Liberty, her torch microphone, because it was blotted out by the lower third that said exclusive. So they took a clip of our show and they wrote exclusive, what they were about to do, which we had already done, and it was from our show, but it's okay. Because our philosophy is steal this story, please. We call it trickle-up journalism. So we gotta trickle this book up the list. It doesn't get reviewed by the Times, anything like that, like other bestsellers do. But what it means is libraries take it, bookstores that are not like the bookseller, that just stock the the bestseller list, and wonderful people go into them, you know, looking for something different. And they don't understand how the system works. And if we can get there, we can provide a roadmap for people who are desperately looking for something else, which I think is the majority of people in this country, a roadmap to other universes and galaxies, other voices, other media that they can turn to. And that's why we know we can only do it the grassroots way. It won't happen any other way. I really do think that those who care about war and peace, those who care about the growing inequality in this country, I mean, it is astounding what Oxfam just did a study of the 62 richest people in the world, 43 of them Americans, own more wealth than half the population of the world. 62 people own more wealth than 3.5 billion people. You can fit them on a school bus and it wouldn't be crowded. And it leads to the closing of schools all over the world, right? Austerity. It is the biggest gap in income in this country than we've seen in more than a century. It's not good for the rich, it's not good for the poor, it's not good for everyone else. It is a threat to a democratic society. So those who care about inequality, those who care about climate change, the fate of the planet, are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take it back. Now, as you know, I come from Pacifica Radio, which was founded 67 years ago. We just did a big fundraiser for KPFA in Berkeley for its 67th birthday. It's the founding of Pacifica. Founded by a man named Lou Hill, who was a conscientious objector in World War II. When he came out of the detention camps, he said, "We need a media outlet not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists." And that's how Pacifica was born. Not run by corporations, as George Gerbner said, founder of the Cultural Environment Movement, late dean of the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania. Not run by corporations that have nothing to tell and everything to sell, who are raising our children today. KPFA, 1949. KPFK in Los Angeles, 1959. And we were just at KPFK holding a big fundraiser, and the next night I was invited on Bill Maher. And it was an interesting night with Susan Sarandon, so it was lovely to see her, and Ariana Huffington. As soon as I saw Ariana, I snuggled up on her shoulder. I just wanted to get a quick nap. You know that she wrote The Sleep Revolution. She is now the sleep guru who believes that sleep is the answer. I respect her, but I did want to debate her on this issue. I asked if we could go on the Bill Maher show and discuss the merits of sleeplessness. She didn't appreciate that, but I said, I really swear I am going to take a long nap in June. Now, so that was KPFK. WBAI is my station in New York, and it went on the air, and within a year or two, it was hosting a debate between Malcolm X and James Baldwin, the great writer, on the effectiveness of nonviolent civil disobedience. That's the effectiveness of the sit-ins in the South. And then there was KPFT in Houston, went on the air in 1970, and WPFW in Washington went on the air in 1977. That's the Fab Five. And all of the sensational affiliates all over the country, like this wonderful radio station, like WVMR, Victorian Museum Radio, which I always like to talk about with Steve when I do the fundraising. And I don't usually do this with any other station, I have to say. When he calls and says, you know, Monday at 7, I think, fine, okay, I'd love to do it. And then it's only when I go home, wiped out from getting up at like 3 or 4 in the morning, that I realize, oh no, he was talking about Pacific time. Oh my God. And so by 10 o'clock, like, I'm trying to keep my eyes open, and I'm always very nervous. I hope no one records our pitches, because I'm never sure what I'm going to say. I mean, you know, when you're sort of half awake, half asleep, hallucinating. So don't listen, but do support KVMR, because KVMR is a gem here. And I really mean that. So those are the 5 Pacifica stations. And I want to talk about KPFT for a minute, the one in Houston and the Petro Metro that we're going to be red-eyeing tonight to get to tomorrow for a 1 p.m. event on May Day, and then we're going to be racing off to New Orleans to be there at 7 for an event in New Orleans, and then we'll be doing the broadcast from New Orleans the next day. And let's see if Dennis has got my phone with the information I needed. And then we are going to turn Tuesday. We'll be in Sarasota Monday night doing the broadcast from Florida there. That day I'll be speaking with Jeremy Scahill, who has a new book out with The Intercept. Jeremy got a start on Democracy Now! Called The Drone Wars. If someone could get Dennis to ask him for my phone. See, all of this has to be done totally transparently. Excellent, Dennis. Oh my God, look what he did. He went even further. Now I have to tell you a story about Dennis. Oh, beautiful. And do you have my phone? That's the thing, you know, and then I get my phone later and I see all these calls to China and stuff. Okay. That's not the story I was going to tell. I mean, Dennis is a remarkable writer. Johnny Appleseed of Community Media as well, building low power and full power FM stations all over, in the middle of one in Denver now and building one in Winter Park in Colorado, a full power FM station. And you know, Democracy Now! Started in 1996 on 9 community radio stations, and now we're on over 1,400 public television and radio stations around the country and around the world. And I was telling you what we're doing Tuesday at SOCOM, you know, Southern Command in Tampa. We'll be talking to Jeremy. But Monday, well, the show changes by the minute, and now I know what Monday's show will be in New Orleans. I don't know if you all heard today, but I got the sad call from Father John Deere, who lives in New Mexico, that Father Dan Berrigan has died. He died earlier today. On May 17th, 1968, 9 people, including Father Berrigan and his brother, Father Phil, who I knew very well, entered a draft board and removed draft files of those who were about to be sent to Vietnam. Today, by the way, is the anniversary of the official ending of the Vietnam War. They took their files, the draft files outside, burned them with homemade napalm, a weapon commonly used on civilians by the U.S. forces. They then awaited their arrest by authorities. The following is the statement Dan Berrigan read in court during their trial. And this is an excerpt of what Dan Berrigan said. Some 10 or 12 of us, the number's still uncertain, will, if all goes well, take our religious bodies during this week to a draft center in or near Baltimore. There we shall, of purpose and forethought, remove the 1A files, sprinkle them in the public street with homemade napalm, and set them afire, for which act we shall, beyond doubt, be placed behind bars for some portion of our natural lives. You see, he wrote this before. In consequence of our inability to live and die content in the plague city, to say peace, peace, when there is no peace, to keep the poor, poor, the homeless, the thirsty and hungry, homeless, thirsty and hungry. Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, the burning of paper instead of children, the angering of the orderlies in the front parlor of the charnel house. We could not, so help us God, do otherwise. We have jail records, we have been turbulent, uncharitable, we failed in love for the brethren, have yielded to fear and despair and pride often in our lives. Forgive us. We are no more, when the truth is told, than ignorant beset men jockeying against all chance at the hour of death for a place at the right hand of the dying one. We act against the law at a time of the Poor People's March, at a time, moreover, when the government is announcing ever more massive paramilitary means to confront disorder in the cities. It's announced that a computerized center is being built in the Pentagon at a cost of some $7 million to offer instant response to outbreaks anywhere in the land. That, moreover, the government takes so serious a view of civil disorder that federal troops with war experience in Vietnam will have first responsibility to quell civil disorder. The implications of all this must strike horror in the mind of any thinking man. Today, on the ride here, I was talking to Jeremy Scahill, who introduced me to the Berrigans, who I am deeply indebted to, Jeremy, for introducing me to this world. And Jeremy said he can never forget that one quote, "Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, the burning of paper instead of children." Father Dan Berrigan, presente. KPFT, 1970. It goes on the air, and within a few weeks, it's blown up. The Ku Klux Klan strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it to smithereens. KPFT then had to get back on its feet, reconstruct their transmitter. There was a silver lining. It's not as if Pacific had money for advertising, and the explosion certainly blew it into the potential listening audience of the people of the Petro Metro. And so, well, I'm not recommending this as an advertising strategy, but KPFT got back on the air. Now, what I didn't say is that the first time they were blown up, it was right in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant. And I thought that was a good song. But so they got back on their feet, they went back on the air, and the Klan blew it up again, this time with 15 times the dynamite, blew it to smithereens. So now it takes months to get back on the air. It's January 1971, and it's a big event. PBS comes in to broadcast the Phoenix rising from the ashes. They've rebuilt their transmitter. KPFT goes back on the air, and Arlo Guthrie is coming to Houston to finish singing his song live on the air. Now, I can't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops, because I often confuse their titles, but he said it was his proudest act. I think that's because he understood how dangerous Pacifica is. Dangerous because it allows people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, whether it's a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, whether it's an Iraqi aunt or an uncle from Afghanistan, or a kid in East St. Louis or the South Valley in Albuquerque, where we just were, or the South Bronx, it challenges the stereotypes and the caricatures that fuel these hate groups. Someone speaking for themselves. Now, you say it sounds like my bubba or my baby, my aunt, my uncle, and I'm not saying you will agree with them. How often do we agree with our family members? But it makes it much more less likely that you will want to hurt them, right? That understanding of where someone is coming from is the beginning of peace. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, all too often, it is wielded as a weapon of war, which is why we have to take it back. Now, I've just told you the story about KPFT. When did that happen? Like 46, 45 years ago. I mean, it's a story about history. I cannot believe that we are talking about the Ku Klux Klan today, in 2016. In the midst of this presidential election. How is it possible that the frontrunner of a major political party, that's right, the Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump, when asked by one of the networks if he would disavow support of a known Klan leader, David Duke, I can't remember if he was the Exalted Cyclops or the Grand Dragon, as you know, because I often confuse their titles, if he would disavow support of David Duke and the Klan, and Donald Trump wavers, right? He says he would have to consider this, look more deeply into this. When was the last time you heard Donald Trump say, I need to consider this, think more about something before he spoke? But in this case, that's what he said. Now, what exactly does he have to consider? Like which Klan chapter it is? You wouldn't want to generalize to all of the KKK in the United States. It is a horrifying thought that the underbelly of hate in this country is being ripped open. And it's so important that we have independent media. I know that young people know what the Klan is. They've heard about it. But we have to understand and go deeply into what it was. Now, September 11, 2001 was a horror, right? 3,000 people incinerated in an instant. We'll never know how many people actually died on that day, because those who go uncounted in life go uncounted in death, and they're the undocumented workers and immigrants who live near the World Trade Center. But it was a horror. We were the closest national broadcast to Ground Zero. However, it was not the first time terror came to U.S. soil. Ask any African American about slavery. Ask any Native American about what's happened in this country. But it was horrific. The Ku Klux Klan was a homegrown American terroristic organization that terrorized a whole population. Untold murders, lynchings, maimings. That's what the Klan was. And we have to remind people every day when a major political figure in this country says he would have to weigh the support of a terroristic organization. By the way, Dennis and others are handing out the Daily Digest to hook you up with news headlines every day. I hope you'll sign up for it as a way we keep in touch with you. You can also just use your phones. You don't do it right now, but remember this number, 66866. And you can just text the word Democracy Now! To 66866. And it'll request your email. You can put it in, and then you are linked to us. You just approve in your email our request, and you from then on will be hooked up with us every day. And it's a great way to keep in touch. And if you take any pictures today or maybe outside when we're signing, and by the way, come over even if you don't get a book. If you want to wait, I would love to say hi to you. And if you have story ideas, you don't have to wait online, you can. But at any time, remember, you can always email us at stories@democracynow.org. Send us links to articles, stories you want to tell us, maybe not even written about yet, suggestions of people to interview, their contact information. This is how we do it. This is how we bring you those authentic voices in this community and around the world. I want to talk a little more about the elections. You know, on this crazy tour, when we were last in San Francisco, today we're in San Mateo, back in San Francisco from a week ago when we were there. We were racing to the airport, and AJ Plus called, you know, Al Jazeera Plus. You know, Al Jazeera America is closed, which is very sad. But AJ Plus continues, and it's in the old offices of Vice President Al Gore, because remember, he owned Current TV. He sold it to Al Jazeera. So they called and said, would you like to come over just to do an interview? They're Al Jazeera Online, basically, AJ Plus. Oh, I'm so sorry. I said, we are racing to the airport. They said, we're just on the way to the airport, please. I said, I can spend like 5 minutes. Good, come for 5 minutes. Okay. So we stopped by. Dennis didn't even have time to get out of the car as he was fixing things by the time I was in and out. And I said, 5 minutes, go. So they asked me about the elections, and I quickly told them what I thought. And this week, how many of you have seen this video? Oh my God, this is crazy. So then this week, a few days ago, they put it online. I last looked early this morning. It's going to be very different now because it's only been on for a few days. There have been more than 10 million views of this 3 minutes. Never doubt what you can accomplish in a few minutes. I actually think I spoke for longer than 3 minutes. It might have been 6, and they say they're doing part 2 this week. And they've translated into Spanish. Someone else just translated into Portuguese. But let me tell you the point I was making. And I actually don't think for many of you it's going to be that novel. You see, these views rarely hit the corporate media radar screen, but they are, I believe, what most people think in this country. It's not that unique. It's that you don't get it in the so-called hallowed halls of the corporate networks. So, one of my challenges is, let there be an electoral season without polls. It is outrageous the way the networks cover these elections. You tune into any of them. I'm not just talking Fox, CNN, MSNBC. She's ahead 20, he's ahead, he's going back, she's falling ahead, she's falling back, he's falling, and you're just, you might as well be at the horse race, right? You have no idea what these people represent. But you know, she's moving up, he's moving back. Oh my God, he's pulling up on the side. He's pulling up, he's pulling up. You can't believe it. But there's a flashy graphics, and you are completely mesmerized. And you gain nothing. I mean, why polls? Does it really matter what your next door neighbor thinks, what your barber thinks, what your librarian thinks, what your bookseller thinks when you're deciding who to vote for? No. What matters when you're deciding who to vote for is their record, the promises they make, how do they compare to what they've actually done in their lives. Not that you can't change your mind and say, okay, I've changed my view on this. But these people have long records. And what is it that they have done in their lives? That's going to inform who you want to support, who will be the most effective leader in this country. If these same networks would take the millions of dollars, the energy and that they spend on polls and put them into investigations, put them into delineations and exposés of records, this is media serving a democratic society. Now you might say, no, wait a second. It's a little extreme. I am interested in what people actually think. Wait a second. Do you know how many actual legitimate polls we have? I mean, what is a primary or a caucus? It's a poll of what people think in a certain state. So every time, which is almost every week, there is a primary. At the end of the night, you learn who voted, who didn't vote. And by the way, that's the big story. In most cases, more than 80% of people are not voting in these primaries and caucuses. So when you're feeling dispirited, and how could someone support that person, remember, it's a tiny fraction of the voting electorate, or the people who could vote in this country. But yes, then you find racial difference. What is the breakdown gender-wise? What's the breakdown economically? What's the breakdown age-wise of a particular state? And that's interesting. It's fact-based. And then you move on to the next poll. But what do they do instead? They come up with all these polls. You watch, you're mesmerized. You have no idea what these politicians think and actually do. You get to a primary day, and then they say, oh my gosh, these polls were all wrong. And then they spend the next period of time talking about how they got it so wrong. Now let's talk about where the money comes from to do all of this. And this is where they are really, this is a media that does not serve a democratic society. Let's look at the major problem in this country, as people will tell you in the last few weeks who've been arrested in Washington, Democracy Spring, Democracy Awakening, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people following in Granny D's footsteps, going to Washington saying money is drowning our politics, is corrupting our politics. So are the networks going to cover this? You know, part of their actions were, where are you? Where are you? I mean, how often do you have over, I think it was over 1,000 people, 1,200 people who were arrested. Could you imagine if 1,200 people were arrested in Havana, Cuba? Every network would be on this. All the major network anchors would be in Havana showing you how undemocratic this country was. But here in this country, when in our nation's capital, 1,200 people get arrested, and it's hardly a blip on the corporate media radar screen. And what are they saying? These politicians are raising obscene amounts of money. This has to stop. Why isn't it being covered? Okay, all the politicians are doing this. Why do they have to do it? Well, they raise this money. Where does the vast majority of the money go? It goes to the networks to pay for advertising, to pay for campaign ads. These networks, this is the greatest boondoggle for them every 4 years, and it only gets better and better for them and worse for democracy. So they are hardly going to raise the question of whether these politicians should be spending this kind of money when they are re-outfitting their newsrooms, when they are pouring the money into the owners of these networks, the handful of media moguls who own hundreds of channels. I mean, and then let's go to the coverage. It doesn't matter if you're watching CNN, MSNBC, or Fox. I was invited on CNN to talk about this by Brian Stelter, the former New York Times reporter who now does Reliable Sources on Sunday morning on CNN, actually to critique their network. Though he tried to defend it, but to his credit, he had me on. And I said, it's hard to tell the difference between you guys. I'm including Fox in this because Donald Trump doesn't sound different on any of these networks, right? I mean, unless they're static in one of them, they are bringing him to you live all the time with this ridiculous lower third that says breaking news. Whenever he speaks, that is breaking news. Now, the Tyndall report looked at the coverage of the candidates in 2015, the whole year. Donald Trump got 23 times the coverage of Bernie Sanders. ABC World News Tonight, I think, did 81 minutes on Donald Trump, 20 seconds on Bernie Sanders. I'm really curious what Bernie Sanders did that day to merit that kind of attention. Or maybe it was 3 different times, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, and 10 seconds. I want to look at one night, March 15th. I think they called that, let's see, Super Tuesday 3, okay? And that was a night of 5 primaries. It was Illinois, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, and Florida. It was a big night, and the networks were covering it, as they should, wall to wall. It was Marco Rubio, who pulled out because he didn't win his home state, Florida. They played his concession speech. It was John Kasich, who won his first primary, Ohio, gave a victory speech. They played it, as they should have. It was Ted Cruz. They played a speech. It was Hillary Clinton. She had won North Carolina, Ohio, and Florida, and she smartly gave her speech right then. She was on a high, 3 states, because the next 2, Missouri and Illinois, her home state, it was neck and neck with Bernie Sanders. And the network said this, neck and neck, we can't predict, neck and neck, it's Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton. We can't tell, we're gonna go late into the night on this one, too close to call. And then they said Donald Trump was about to speak, right? Donald Trump, and they then showed on the upper right-hand corner a box that showed the podium empty in one of his Florida mansions. And they said, he's gonna talk, he's gonna talk, he's gonna talk. And they're waiting, and the pundits are filling the airtime. If you watch, does any of you, by the way, here in Grass Valley watch TV? Yes, okay. So you know what it looks like, and you know these pundits, who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. So you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and he's going to hold a news conference. He's pioneered this, he had done it a few weeks before. He held a news conference for an hour, and they played the whole hour on another primary night. He's trumpeting Trump water, Trump steaks, Trump magazines, and they never pull away. In the olden days, once they get going, they stop. And for something like this, it was a kind of bizarre. And they play the whole thing. In fact, in the middle of that, Hillary Clinton spoke on that previous primary night. They recorded her and they played it after, but they certainly didn't break away from Mr. Trump. So that was then. Now we go to March 15th. He's going to hold another news conference. It's not actually a news conference, but he does speak for half an hour. They play the whole thing. And that pretty much did it. I mean, that was everyone, right? Cruz, Clinton, Kasich, Trump. Who? Oh, Bernie's, oh, right. Well, there's something worse than even going after someone, negative news about someone. And that is not covering them at all. I call it the vanishing. Bernie Sanders, what was he doing that night? I mean, they were even saying neck and neck, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. But there was no Bernie Sanders. I mean, did he go to sleep early? I would have made Ariana Huffington very happy, but did he take the evening off? No, actually, we just came from Arizona, Flagstaff, Tucson, and Phoenix in a couple hours. And in every place I said, where were you on March 15th at night? Oh, I was at the Bernie Sanders rally. Oh my God, Bernie Sanders was in Phoenix, Arizona, speaking to thousands and 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 thousands of people. No, I'm not exaggerating. I think it was something like 8,000 people. Maybe it was more. They never played a speech. he even had started before Donald Trump when they were just filling the airtime. But not only that, they didn't even speculate on any of these networks, on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. They didn't even speculate, where's Bernie tonight? So we were not planning to do this, but the next morning on Democracy Now!, we decided to play an excerpt of Bernie Sanders' speech in Phoenix. Why? Well, who would have thunk it? Who would have thought it was a revolutionary act to play the speech of a major party candidate on primary night or the morning after? But that's what it has become, and it's absolutely unacceptable. You know, these networks are using the public airwaves, and they have a responsibility to bring out the full spectrum of opinion, or they should lose their licenses. You know, they may be private corporations. They may be private corporations, but they're using public property. Now, the time you hear Bernie Sanders covered, I mean, now you might say, no, I've seen him somewhat. Yeah, he's broken every single record. Whatever happens, March, he raised $44 million to Hillary Clinton's $29 million, and he does it with full transparency on the campaign trail. He says, please, give me money, and someone gives 3, someone gives 7, someone gives 9, the average is $27, and you never max out because you're giving so little, but you can give it frequently. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, has to go off the campaign trail into these private fundraisers, and she has many fewer donors. He has well over 6 million, breaking every record. She has fewer donors who are maxing out. So we were in Laurel Canyon recently, right? Not where she was, but she was in Laurel Canyon, and she was at a fundraiser that was held by George and Amal Clooney. And I think the going rate to sit at the head table was $350-something thousand. Okay, it was for a couple, so. And even George Clooney, when asked on the networks about this party, said, yeah, the money raised was obscene. And it was his party. So these are very serious issues. And overall, the networks, not just once or in a special about money and politics, have to hit this every single day. This is why so many people across the political spectrum are dissatisfied. And it's the movements that are making a difference, that are challenging these. And that's what I want to talk about next. I want to talk about the movements that matter so much. Let's go back to earlier this year, to the horror in Charleston, South Carolina, when the Beautiful Nine were gunned down. They are known as the Beautiful Nine, the 8 parishioners and their pastor, Reverend Clemente Pinckney, in Mother Emanuel Church, the Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, in the middle of June. They're engaging in Bible study. Reverend Pinckney was also an Alabama state senator. He'd raced home from Columbia just to be with his flock and to have Bible study. A young white supremacist, a young white man, came in, asked if he could join them. They welcomed him, was with them for an hour, and then gunned them down. A few days later, Dylan Storm Roof would be arraigned. And the survivors of the killing and the loved ones of those who were killed put the country to shame when they forgave him. I think Dylan Storm Roof unwittingly blew the roof off of the Confederacy. What would happen next? Reverend Clemente Pinckney his body would lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda in Columbia, South Carolina. Thousands streamed by his casket to see. But first they had to stream past the Confederate flag. The flag that Dylan Storm Roof wrapped himself in, so worshipped. They had to pass the Confederate flag, which flew high and proud on the State House grounds and had for more than half a century. Truly astounding. As the state legislature, which met inside, had to decide over that period of weeks whether it was time to take down the flag. Wasn't ready yet after they were killed, wasn't ready yet when everyone would have to pass by this flag. And you know, all the flags in South Carolina flew at half-mast after the horror, well, except for one. That flag on the Capitol grounds, because it went up in early 60s as an answer to the civil rights movement. And by 2000, the NAACP and even some sports franchises said they were going to boycott South Carolina if they didn't take it off it was on top of the Capitol at the time. So the compromise was it would come off the Capitol and stand on the grounds, part of a Confederate memorial. But it was hooked in such a way that it could never fly at half-mast. So it was the only flag that flew at full mast when the others flew at half-mast. Also, the penalty was increased. This was part of the compromise for anyone who dared to deface or pull this flag down. Now, I think if you asked anyone today who is responsible for ultimately taking down the flag on the Capitol grounds, they might say the governor, Nikki Haley, who led the charge for the legislature to begin this sort of period of healing and take it down. But that's not who took down the flag. It was a 30-year-old woman, African-American woman, named Bree Newsom. It was 5:30. It was 5:30 in the morning, 2015, June 27th, 10 days after the massacre at Emmanuel AME Church. South Carolina State House glowed in the morning light. Bree Newsom from Charlotte, North Carolina, walked toward the main entrance of the building. She was accompanied by Jimmy Tyson, a young white man from North Carolina, others who scouted the grounds as well. They observed the scene around the State House, waiting until there were no guards visible. After about 30 minutes, Bree and Jimmy made their move. They walked swiftly toward the Confederate monument, which stands directly in front of the main steps. The tall monument, topped with a heroic image of a Confederate soldier, pays tribute to those who have glorified a fallen cause: slavery. The two activists proceeded to the 30-foot-high flagpole that stood directly behind the monument. The Confederate battle flags flapped lazily at the top. And then Bree Newsom made her move. She donned her climbing equipment, which she had learned how to use a few days before. And then the guards saw this young woman making her way to the top of the flagpole. They came running. They demanded that she come down. Reaching the top of the flagpole, she grabbed the Confederate flag and unhooked it. She said, "You come against me with hatred and oppression and violence. I come against you in the name of God." As she clutched the symbol of the Confederacy, she said, "This flag comes down today." She lowered herself slowly along with the flag. As soon as she reached the ground, Jimmy and Bree were arrested. Video of the protests went viral, was seen around the world. Her bail fund quickly raised more than $125,000. Ava DuVernay, director of the Oscar-nominated film Selma, which you all should see, was among the many to hail her. She tweeted, "I hope I get the call to direct the motion picture about a black superhero I admire. Her name is Bree Newsom." But within about an hour, two State House workers raised a new Confederate flag on the Capitol grounds. How could this be? This was the day after thousands gathered 2 hours away in Charleston at the College of Charleston Arena in a joint funeral for all of the victims. We were there, of course. President Obama sang Amazing Grace there. And then that next day, we were planning to stay in Charleston, because one funeral after another for each individual victim was being held. And so as these victims were being lowered into the ground, the guards on the ground of the Capitol were raising the Confederate flag once again. We raced from Charleston to Columbia and found out where Bree and Jimmy were being held. We went into the jail. We somehow got into the room of the arraignment and saw the two of them. They were charged with defacing state property, facing that heightened penalty of up to 3 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. Afterwards, we waited in the lobby with other people who were gathering to greet these two heroes if they were to get out that day. And I asked Tamika Lewis, who I bumped into, who had come with Bree from Charlotte, North Carolina. She traveled to be part of this action. I asked her how she felt. She said, to see the flag actually come down and all the things it represents being taken down by a strong Black woman was one of the greatest symbolic images that one person could ever witness. Another young woman named Carol Parker from Columbia did not know Newsom, but came to the jail because she was so inspired and wanted to show her support. She said, Bree has done what our governor hasn't had the courage to do, what our General Assembly hasn't had the courage to do. She went up there and did what had to be done when it needed to be done. Yes, weeks later, the state legislature would decide that it was time to take down the flag. But let it be known, it was Bree Newsom who took down the symbol of the Confederacy in South Carolina. Now I want to talk about 1 year of movements, because movements matter. It's the year 2011, and to have a media that covers the movements, it's not about individuals. I mean, Bree was part of many different groups, and those groups are made up of remarkable people, but it's so important. The media denigrates activists and movements, and we need a media like KVMR, like Democracy Now!, that actually shines a spotlight, hands the microphone over to those who are trying to make the world a better place. I mean, think about the Black Lives Matter movement today. They're not handed a microphone, so what they do is they grab the microphone at campaign events and they've changed the conversation. In 2016, they challenged, remember ancient history, Martin O'Malley, the governor of Maryland, who ran for president. They challenged Bernie Sanders at a Netroots Nation event. They challenged Hillary Clinton, holding up signs saying, like, I am not a super predator, because she made that comment in 1996 after her husband, President Clinton, passed the 1994 anti-crime bill that led to, and now Clinton himself acknowledges this, the acceleration of mass incarceration in this country that is such a blight on our reputation in this country and around the world. We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisoners. So let me go, though, to this year of movements, and I'm going to go through it quickly because I want to go outside and meet you individually. It is always wonderful to get to see you, and I can't believe, I think I see her right there, Nefertiti was in Flagstaff at the talk there. You said Flagstaff, right? And she's come here. This is hard to believe. 11 hours to Grass Valley. Now that took a lot of movement. But anyway, December 2010, that was the beginning of the Tunisian Revolution. A young man named Mohamed Bouazizi comes out of university, finds no opportunity. Corrupt dictator has been in charge for so many years in that Middle Eastern country. And he ends up having to sell fruit and vegetables in the marketplace, and the authorities go after him. They steal a scale. He can't take it anymore, and he sets himself on fire. That is the spark of the Tunisian Revolution. And something else did, yes, it was WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, where Julian Assange, the founder, who is now holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy, he got political asylum in Ecuador, but he's afraid if he steps outside in London, where the embassy is, he'll be arrested and ultimately sent to the United States. where he's afraid he will be charged perhaps with treason. We do believe there's a sealed indictment against him for WikiLeaks for releasing the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs, and the State Department documents, millions of them. And if you think, oh God, this guy is paranoid, why would he think that? He's been in the embassy for almost 4 years. Does the name Chelsea Manning ring a bell? Who's now in prison at Leavenworth, sentenced to 37 years for the conviction of really his convictions, right? Her convictions. She transitioned in prison. She was Bradley Manning when she was a US soldier in Iraq and saw documents and video that she thought the American people needed to see, that the American people should weigh in on the wars we were waging in Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the longest war in US history. You know, yes, President Bush started the war, and I couldn't help thinking when Dennis talked about the correspondence dinner tonight in Washington, D.C., how if you go back to, I can't remember if it was 2003, 2004, 2005, when President Bush was at the correspondence dinner, you know, it's sort of this whole roasting thing. He showed this video of himself, right, crawling in the Oval Office. You remember this? Looking under all the tables and chairs. I know those weapons of mass destruction are somewhere, and I could only think, oh my God, what do the families of servicemen and women who've died in Iraq think when he says, I know those WMD are somewhere, as the hundreds of journalists in the room laughed. But we go from President Bush to President Obama, and of course Obama did not start these wars, but he continued them. He actually, I believe, is president because he was opposed to the war in Iraq. Hillary Clinton voted for it. That was the main difference between them, and so he won the Democratic nomination and would go on to become president of the United States. It's 7 years in, and he has presided over the longest war in US history in Afghanistan and expanded this war with the drone strikes and now soldiers on the ground everywhere from Syria to Yemen and beyond. We have to take this extremely seriously. As a journalist, I'm a journalist covering, same journalist covering Republican and Democratic presidents. Now, go from Tunisia and why WikiLeaks played a role. Because the State Department cables showed, I mean, it's not like the people of Tunisia didn't know their dictator was corrupt, but the WikiLeaks cable showed that the US government knew it too, but still shored him up to the tune of millions of dollars, and it just made them angrier. So they rise up, they throw out their despot, and that sparks the Egyptian revolution, completely astounding. What took place there, 1 million people in Tahrir, not only in Cairo, but in Alexandria and all these other places in Egypt, and they throw out their long-standing despot. Now, what's happened in Egypt is pretty horrifying since then. It has taken a very painful turn. It's an unfinished revolution, which we will continue to cover. But then I think the Arab Spring inspired what happened in Wisconsin, right? 150,000 people march in the winter of 2011. I mean, I think Governor Scott Walker also inspired it. Right? The governor who said once he was elected, he was going to go after public unions. He was going to bust them. He was going to go after the nurses and the teachers. Oh, not to worry, he said to the police and the firefighters. He said, you're safe, but the teachers and the nurses were going after you. Governor Walker's problem was that the police and the firefighters were married to the teachers and the nurses. And they also understood the philosophy that, you know, first they come after them, and if you don't speak out, next they'll come after you, and there will be no one left to speak out. And so what we saw when we arrived in the Wisconsin Capitol, in the state Capitol building that was occupied by everyone across the political spectrum, was just astounding. We saw, when we first came in, the biggest guys I have ever seen in my life, the Oshkosh prison guards. And I turned to them and I said, well, who did you vote for? And they said, Governor Walker, of course. And I said, but what are you doing here? They said, protesting Governor Walker, of course. And then I went outside, freezing cold, 150,000 people, older gentleman, white hair, glasses, marching with his handmade placard, IRS auditors against Walker. And I said, well, what party are you with, Democrat or Republican? He said, I'm a Republican. And I said, well, your governor's a Republican. He said, yeah, but he didn't tell us he was going to do this. You know, Wisconsin's an interesting place. It's home to the John Birch Society, founded decades ago, the racist, white supremacist, secessionist, anti-civil rights, anti-King organization that was co-founded by Fred Koch. That's, yes, the father of the oil barons Charles and David Koch. But you also have Wisconsin home to AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, founded in 1932. And when I looked out on the Capitol grounds, this vast vista of protest, across the street, I saw the Labor History Museum of Wisconsin. I thought about, well, if you say, I mean, what did that protest amount to, a hill of beans? I mean, Governor Walker was reelected. Well, he also ran for president and had to pull out pretty fast, and I think this contributed to it. You never know how movements will shape, reshape, take different forms, what will happen. But I think it had a huge effect. Let's go back to another time in history, 1968, April 4th, Memphis, Tennessee. You know that date, the date that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. What was he doing in Memphis? He was simply there to stand with sanitation workers who were trying to form a local of AFSCME. A year to the day before Dr. King was killed, he was in New York at Riverside Church giving a speech to thousands of people, April 4th, 1967, giving that speech, why I oppose the war in Vietnam. Now, even his inner circle said, Martin, don't do this. This is not your war. You have the most powerful person on earth, the President of the United States, it was Lyndon Johnson, wrapped around your finger. These are his friends telling him. You got him to sign the Voting Rights Act. You got him to sign the Civil Rights Act. Don't do this, Martin. And Dr. King came out to the podium and he spoke against the war in Vietnam. He took on militarism, materialism, racism. He said, my country, the United States, is the greatest purveyor of violence on earth. He was slammed by the corporate press. I mean, I have the Life magazine issue, and by Time magazine and by Washington Post. They said his speech read like a script from Radio Hanoi. They said he had done a disservice to his cause, his country, and his people. And he just doubled down. He spoke louder and more often. Within a year, he would be gunned down. But these are the movements that matter. Never doubt for a moment, Margaret Mead said, that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And when that movement gets bigger and bigger, there is no telling what can happen. Let's move forward to the end of the summer of 2011. Ring around the Rose Garden, thousands of people protest outside the White House, calling for President Obama to nix the Keystone XL pipeline. Thousands, 1,200 are arrested, among them the great writer Naomi Klein. Her first arrest was that day. Read all her books. This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, and No Logo, Taking Aim at Brand Bullies. Oh, Bill McKibben was also arrested, co-founder of 350.org, and then move forward 3 weeks later, September 17, 2011. That was Occupy Wall Street, thousands streaming into Zuccotti Park. The corporate media did the vanishing thing, didn't cover them. For like a week, didn't cover them. I mean, we were in the media metropolis of the world. They passed by them, you know, in their limos, headed to their corporate networks, didn't cover them. Could you imagine, again, if there was this protest in Havana, Georgia, with thousands of people? In Havana, Cuba, where all the network anchors would be reporting on this undemocratic society, and here they were at Occupy Wall Street. And then the media started to cover them. And they said, what do these people represent? They can't even make up their mind. They're against the death penalty. They're against war. They're against inequality. They're against racism. And they're against mass incarceration. They're against, fossil fuel economy. You're concerned about climate change. And I was thinking, oh my God, the media is listening. That's exactly what their views are. They saw that as their weakness. I saw it as their strength. Right? Like King, they saw all of these issues connected, a seamless web. And then they would say, they are so confused, they can't even choose their leaders. Well, they are a leaderful organization, not a leaderless organization. And if you say, oh, come on, all that fizzled too. I mean, that was 2011. The police eviscerated the encampments from Occupy Oakland to Occupy Wall Street. But the movement mattered. I mean, Occupy occupied the language. I think it was the word most often looked up, used, according to Webster's that year, occupy. You say the word 1% and you say the word 99%, everyone knows what you are talking about. You change the language, you change the world. Among the signs that people carried on that day was, I am Troy Davis. And Too Much Doubt. How many of you know who Troy Davis was? Pretty informed population here in Grass Valley, but I'm going to go through what happened to Troy anyway. September 21st, 2011, 4 days after Occupy Wall Street, we raced to Georgia to cover, well, we didn't know what would happen, but Troy Davis was on death row in Georgia, served half his life on death row. He was scheduled to die. We're reporting live from the grounds outside Georgia's death row in the town of Jackson, awaiting news about whether the U.S. Supreme Court would spare his life. I am Troy Davis had become the rallying cry of a growing international movement to stop his execution. The effort had grown, now included prosecutors, prison wardens, a former U.S. president, and the Pope, all calling for Troy Anthony Davis' life to be spared. This is the story of a struggle against death that refuses to die. Troy Anthony Davis was an 18-year-old African-American teenager who lived in Savannah, Georgia. On the night of August 18th, 1989, he went to Charlie Brown's pool hall with a friend. In the parking lot outside, Red Coles, a neighborhood tough, was arguing loudly with a homeless man named Larry Young. Several witnesses testified later that Coles pistol whipped Young. Pool hall patrons came outside to see what was happening. Troy Davis tried to intervene in the fight, but fled when Coles threatened him with a gun. At 1:15 in the morning, Mark McPhail, a white off-duty Savannah police officer who was working as a security guard at a Greyhound bus station next door, came outside to break up the fight. Gunshots pierced the summer night. Moments later, McPhail lay dying with a bullet wound to the head and another to the heart. He never drew his gun. He was a hero cop. The question was, who killed him? Red Coles immediately raced to the police station with his lawyer and pointed the finger at Troy Davis. The next day, Troy Davis's face would be plastered over every newscast. His name was being talked about everywhere. There was a statewide manhunt for him. He was in Atlanta, 4 hours away with his cousin looking for a job. His family tried to reach him. They did. They said, Troy, you got to come home. They're saying that you did this. And Martina, his older sister, Martina Correa, went to get him. She is a heroine. Martina was a Persian Gulf Army nurse. She had to come back to this country because she was diagnosed with breast cancer. But she didn't just stop at fighting for her own life. Her face adorned all the mammogram vans of Savannah to encourage Black women and poor women to get mammograms. She was celebrated as a leading light in Washington with Nancy Pelosi. But now she would not only fight for her life and women's lives, she would end up having to fight for her brother's life. She picked up Troy in Atlanta, brought him back. Troy turned himself in to the Chatham County Sheriff's Office. The teenager thought it was a case of mistaken identity, that he would simply clear up the confusion. Instead, Troy Davis was charged with murder. He was held in jail for 2 years before being finally tried in 91. A jury deliberated for 2 hours and returned a guilty verdict. On August 30th, 1991, Troy Anthony Davis, age 20, was sentenced to die. He would spend the next 20 years on death row. During that time, 7 of the 9 non-police witnesses recanted or changed their testimony, with some alleging police intimidation for their original false statements. Only one did not recant, the man who many had named as the actual killer, Red Coles. No physical evidence linked Davis to the shooting. So there's the background. We race to Jackson, Georgia. We're going to cover this execution, no matter what happened. Now, how would we do it? We can't go into a studio in Jackson, Georgia. So we hired a satellite truck, like the big boys do, would come on the grounds, and we didn't know what would happen that day. There were 3 previous death warrants. All had been vacated. But we were going to be there. If we could have been in the execution chamber, we would have been. Because I really do think, if you see the images, that the American people will make a very different decision than our government has made today, or the governments of states all over the country. How isolated we are when it comes to getting information about the rest of the world, how alone we are in the industrialized world in carrying out the death penalty in the United States, considered barbaric in so many other countries. So this satellite truck was late. We were deeply concerned. I was there with our senior producer, Mike Burke, and Renee Feltz, who started the newsroom at the Klan-targeted station KPFT, Hani Massoud, who leaps tall buildings in a single bound with his video camera. You want him at your side in times of trouble. We're on the grounds, and we're waiting for the satellite truck. You know, CNN would hire it, and the next day, Fox had hired it before. We never were able to do this before, but at a time like this, it was critical that we be on the scene. Finally, the satellite truck pulled up, but the prison guards had put all the satellite trucks, made them go to the periphery of the prison grounds. What was the point? Why would we be broadcasting them? Because we were there to go to where the silence was, to point our microphones at those who had come from around the world to protest Troy Anthony's death. The prison guards had set up a pen of 150 protesters on the grounds. And they were over here. People from all over the world. Martina Correa and the family was in the middle. Human rights leaders were around them. Martina was now in a wheelchair. She would die weeks later of breast cancer. 1,000 people were outside. The students from Morehouse, King's alma mater, and Spelman, all holding candles. We wanted to convey what was happening here, capture this scene. So when the satellite truck pulled up, they pulled down their window. They rolled down their window. I didn't know who they were. We had just hired them from Atlanta. He said, "Where do you want the satellite truck, ma'am?" And I said, "Well, the prison guards are saying you have to go over there." And they said, "No, where do you want the satellite truck, ma'am?" So I said, "Oh, well, I want it over by the protest pen." And they barreled this truck over to the pen. And the prison guards came running over. They said, "Hey," and then these guys got out. And they were bigger than the Oshkosh prison guards. And they had these huge cameras. And they got out of the truck. They handed me the microphone. And they formed a kind of protective semicircle around me. The prison guards backed off. They handed me the mic and they said, "Where do you want to stand?" I said, "Well, right up against the rope so I can reach over and talk to everyone." They said, "Start the broadcast." And we did. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. Oh, one other thing. The Department of Corrections had given us the press packet to talk about what would happen that day. And first thing it said is that Troy Davis would be with his family until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then they would have to clear out. That's why they were already in the prison grounds on the outside, so that Troy could get his routine physical. Routine physical? Did it really matter if he had heart disease, if the state was going to kill him in 4 hours? Routine physical? Well, you know what had happened a little before that? A Texas man on death row had attempted suicide. They raced him to the hospital. They got him better, and then they executed him. Okay, the next page talked about what Troy would have for dinner. And he had turned down the special meal. You know, you can choose anything, chocolate-covered strawberries, steak, your last meal. But he had said no. So they said he would be offered the standard fare, and they wrote about it in detail. The press packet said he would get grilled cheeseburgers, oven-browned potatoes, baked beans, coleslaw, cookies, and a great beverage. The next page had just 4 lines on it. It listed the lethal cocktail that would follow: pentobarbital, pancuronium bromide, potassium chloride, and Ativan, in parentheses, a sedative. The pentobarbital anesthetizes, the pancuronium bromide paralyzes, and the potassium chloride stops the heart. Davis refused the sedative and the Last Supper. By 7 p.m., the U.S. Supreme Court was reportedly reviewing Davis's plea for a stay. The case was referred to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who hails from Pinpoint, Georgia, a community founded by freed slaves that's near Savannah. Needless to say, the Supreme Court denied the plea. Davis's execution began at 10:53 p.m. A prison spokesperson delivered the news to the reporters outside. Time of death, 11:08 p.m. The eyewitnesses to the execution stepped out. According to an Associated Press reporter who was there, these were Troy Davis's final words. As he was strapped down on the gurney, his arms out, legs tied down, sort of like a Christ-like image, he said, "I'd like to address the McPhail family. Let you know I'm not the one who killed your son, your father, your brother. I am innocent. The incident that happened that night was not my fault. I did not have a gun. All I can ask is that you look deeper into this case so that you really can finally see the truth. I ask my family and friends to continue to fight the fight." And then he looked at his executioners and said, "For those about to take my life, God have mercy on your souls. May God bless your souls." The state of Georgia took Davis's body to Atlanta for an autopsy, charging his family for the transportation. On Troy Davis's death certificate, the cause of death is listed simply as homicide. As we stood on the grounds of the prison just after Troy Davis was executed, the Georgia Department of Corrections threatened to pull the plug on our broadcast. The show was over. I was reminded of what Mahatma Gandhi reportedly answered when asked when he thought of Western civilization. He said, "I think it would be a good idea." That was September 21st, 2011. Let's move to the end of the year. Let's move to December 2011. Let's move to the UN Climate Summit. That year it was held in Durban. Now, those of you who listen to or watch Democracy Now! Or read it at democracynow.org know we go to every UN Climate Summit, and I'm going to make this fast because I know we're coming to the end of the time that we have. We can't miss that plane. Or KPFT in Houston will never forgive you, or me. It's really me that will be in trouble. We covered the climate summits from Copenhagen to Cancun, even Cochabamba, the UN People's Summit in Bolivia. Then we went to Durban, the next year in Doha, the following year in Poland, then Peru, this last year in Paris. Thousands of people come to these UN climate summits. You might wonder why we go every year. We're the only national broadcast to bring you uninterrupted coverage every day, every minute of our show for 1 or 2 weeks. Only national broadcast to do that. It is to bring you the voices of people all over the world who are desperately pleading with the historically largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, please, to change our ways. Because, as the 15-year-old boy from the Maldives would say, my country will be submerged, it will be no longer. Or as the people of sub-Saharan Africa say, you're desertifying our continent. In fact, in our country, you know full well that we are experiencing the grave effects of climate change. People just don't understand because the conditions are so disparate. Freezing cold in the Northeast, the Dust Bowl conditions of the Midwest. You've got these terrible droughts in California. You've got the 1,000-year flood in Colorado and the total shock in Vermont of Hurricane Irene that drowned so many of their cities. And you've got the forest fires up the West Coast. How are all these things connected? These meteorologists on television that people tune in for should not be granted a license, whatever that meteorological license is, if they don't link those words they flash, severe weather, extreme weather, with another two words, climate change and global warming. Now, in 2011, something unusual happened at the UN summit in South Africa. That unusual thing that happened was that those on the inside, thousands are on the outside. They're not accredited. They don't get to come inside. They are the people that we give voice to, but we also question those inside. For the first time, people on the outside were invited in for the end of the summit. The youth were invited to address their elders, the 1,000 people on the UN summit. And it was Anjali Appadare, who is a student at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine, where you get a degree in human ecology, where we'll be speaking in 2 weekends, stood up. Hundreds of youth stood with her in the audience. And this is a part of what she said. I speak for more than half the world's population. We are the silent majority. You've given us a seat in this hall, but our interests are not on the table. What does it take to get a stake in this game? Lobbyists, corporate influence, money? You've been negotiating all my life. You've failed to meet pledges, you've missed targets, you've broken promises, but you've heard this all before. We're in Africa, home to communities on the front line of climate change. The science tells us we have 5 years max. You're saying, give us 10. The starkest betrayal of your generation's responsibility to ours is that you call this ambition. Where is the courage in these rooms? Now is not the time for incremental action. In the long run, these will be seen as the defining moments of an era in which the narrow self-interest prevailed over science, reason, and common compassion. She said, there is real ambition in this room, but it's been dismissed as radical, deemed not politically possible. Stand with Africa. Long-term thinking's not radical. What's radical is to completely alter the planet's climate, to betray the future of my generation, and to condemn millions to death by climate change. What's radical is to write off the fact that change is within our reach. She said 2011 was the year in which the silent majority found their voice, the year when the bottom shook the top. 2011 was the year when the radical became reality. Then she quoted Nelson Mandela. She said, it always seems impossible until it's done. She looked out on the vast vista of faces of the delegates, the bureaucrats, the scientists, the government leaders, and she said, so distinguished delegates in governments around the world, governments of the developed world, deep cuts now, get it done. And it was Democracy Now! That broadcast her voice around the world. Yes, we must support a media that is the exception to the rulers. That shouldn't be only the motto of Democracy Now!, but the motto of all the media. Yes, in this time of high-tech television and digital radio, still all we get is static. That veil of distortion and lies and misrepresentations and half-truths that obscure reality, when what we need the media to give us is the dictionary definition of static. Criticism, opposition, unwanted interference. We need a media that covers power, not covers for power. We need a media that is the fourth estate, not for the state. And we need a media that covers the movements that create static and make history. I want to end where I began, back in World War II, but this time in Nazi Germany. This time with a brother and sister named Hans and Sophie Scholl. They were not Jewish, they were German Christians, but they, together with their professor and other students and some workers, decided to form the White Rose Collective to challenge the Nazis. And how would they do it? They said, we'll put out information so that the Germans will never be able to say we didn't know. So they published a series of 6 pamphlets. On one of them was written the words, we will not be silent. They got them distributed everywhere, in the middle of the night, in alleyways and marketplaces and schoolyards. And then Hans and Sophie and their professor were captured. They were charged, they were tried, they were convicted, and they were beheaded. But that philosophy, that motto, should be the Hippocratic oath of the media today, should be the Hippocratic oath of us all today. We will not be silent. Democracy now. That's okay.
You got it. Here it is. Come on up. Hey, you guys are doing great.
S-I-M-O-N. Thank you so much.
Hi, John.
Thank you so much.
Who should I read?